Welcome, everyone. We're so happy that you're able to join us today for this virtual event. My name is Michael Berry. I'm the director of the Center for Chinese Studies at UCLA, and it is our great pleasure to present Professor Kui Shen from UC San Diego, who will be presenting some of his research today. I think this is our last event of the winter quarter, and so I also want to take this opportunity to thank all of our faculty, all of our speakers, and all of our audience members, and of course the donors behind the scenes who help support our events, everyone who makes the Center for Chinese Studies events possible. We're so happy that you've been through us during these difficult pandemic times, albeit virtually, but we've been very excited to continue bringing really innovative scholarship and lectures to you in this virtual format. For today's event, I am delighted to have my dear colleague, Professor Huishu Li, who will be moderating and also introducing the speaker. So I'm gonna hand the podium over to Professor Li, and she will be introducing Professor Shen. Thank you, everyone.
Well, thank you, Professor Michael Berry, and thank you to Center for Chinese Study, and most of all, thank you to Professor Kui Shen, an old friend and always extremely supportive. I am actually very grateful, and also feel very lucky to be able to get hold of him and giving a talk on such a wonderful topic today: performing contemporary Chinese calligraphic art. Professor Kui Shen actually, doesn't need my introduction. you can read his profile in our CCS, the announcement. Extremely accomplished. He's a star in the field of the very, hot modern contemporary Chinese and Asian art. And he's extremely unique in a few, at least I think, two aspects. He both as a pioneer in this field, but also an authority. And he played dual role. Academically, extremely accomplished. Also in his curatorial work, he has curated numerous shows, and including some of the really the landmark show for the field. And also he extremely organized numerous conferences, all kind of events. And of course, he's been teaching at the UC San Diego for 2 decades, and also nurture, many students now, all either teaching or working in important museums. So you can check into his publication by yourself. A couple of them I would like to mention was the landmark show for A Century in Crisis: Modernity and Tradition in the Art of 20th Century China back to 1998. That's why I say he was one of the pioneers. And work on various media, just you name it. And another thing I would like to mention, since my class, Art in Modern China, the students are participating, I think they're all very excited. The textbook we use, Art of Modern China, was co-authored by Professor Kui Shen and his darling wife, also a colleague, Professor Julia Andrews. So I think my student profile, very familiar by now, because in my syllabus, it's always, Shen and Andrews, Andrews Shen. They're reading your textbook and also, your various publication as monograph or catalog or, independent articles. And of course, Professor Shen has received numerous very prestigious awards, including one from National Endowment of Art, Japan Society. And he's been lecturing and as a guest visitor, I just had a conversation with him before we officially start. Hard for me to keep a track on him, because it's either in Japan, in Hong Kong, in China, or in Europe. Extremely productive and extremely admirable and extremely generous that a scholar truly respect and really, grateful. So without further ado, I would like to, welcome Professor Shen. And today his topic is performing contemporary Chinese calligraphic art. Please, Shen Kui.
Oh, thank you so much, Hui Shu. Thank you very much for your very kind introduction. And I want to thank Professor McBerry and also the Chinese Studies Center for inviting me to UCL for this talk. Although we hold this virtually, but I hope maybe in future we can see you guys in person.
Definitely.
And okay, I think I possibly should have started to share the screen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. As Professor Hui Shu Li already introduced the talk entitled Performing Contemporary Chinese Calligraphy Art. As we know, actually in China, the calligraphy has its very long history. Calligraphy found its place in contemporary Chinese art. However, it's during the modernist art movement in the 1980s. In that too, its ideographic capability, there were two ways for calligraphy to penetrate the contemporary Chinese art world. For some artists focused on the graphic and the abstract feature in ink, shades, and also brush strokes. And while the other group introduced the calligraphic languages and explore the character itself in their artworks. The breaking modern calligraphy exhibition at the National Art Museum of China in 1985 showcased the creative outputs of the artists who intended to experiment with the calligraphy in a modernist manner. They were clearly influenced by the heated discussion of the modernist painting among domestic artists. The inevitable reference include the few characters currently led by the modern Japanese calligrapher, such as the Teshima Yuki and the Inoue Yuichi, and the other avant-garde calligraphic practice. When the artists were occupied with the ideas such as calligraphy entering painting, painting entering calligraphy, or painting and calligraphy share the same root, people's conception of calligraphy and modernist art was fundamentally inadequate. In fact, as early as calligraphy was born out of writing, it transcended functional ideographs and also became a form of art. Calligraphy called shufa in China, and also called shudao, shodo in Japanese, in Japan, and gosoge in the Korea. Here, the fa and the dao and ye all make it clear that calligraphy goes beyond ideographic writing, and it has its own system of formal principles and a standardized essence of calligraphy as the line and the form, not the content and the information. Participants include in the show, we have the Bai Qianshen, Gu Wenda, and Wu Shanzhuan, and also to have okay, we should have, okay. The Chinese writing system actually has been the pictographic form from the very beginning. So it is descriptive and also good at presenting. Just like Xu Bing's work we can show in here, give you kind of the sense and how the Chinese actually writing developed from his bird gun. You can see from the top, the left, corner, you can see the original writing of the words bird, then gradually to the modern writing of the birds. Since the different way of the writing will categorized aesthetically and stylistically into different styles and schools, regardless of the textual contents, the relationship between calligraphy and painting has become more intertwined and complicated. As the art of the calligraphy was introduced into painting, it changed the tongue and the song paintings and built the foundation for literary tradition. But we should realize this process not as the historical necessity. It was a conscious choice. It not only changed the development path of Chinese painting, but also evoked people's consciousness of the graphic potential embedded in calligraphy. During the late Qing and the early Republican era, the superiority of the state school Beixue over the copybook school Tiexue among the intellectuals, together with the rise of the epigraphic taste in the paintings, led to the heightened awareness of calligraphy and painting share the same root. In fact, back to the late 19th century, Wu Changshi, very slow and irregular, yet firmly executed characters in his stone drum inscription would become the artist's unique contribution to the abstract aesthetics in the art of the calligraphy. In the composition of Wu's work, we see the ideographic function has been replaced by the abstract compositional structures and the delightful brushworks. As the Lin Yutang, the famous writer, claimed in his the book, The Gay Genius, The Life and the Times of the Su Dongpo, that I quote here, so fundamental is the place of the calligraphy in Chinese art as the study of form and rhythm in the abstract, that we may say it has provided the Chinese people with the basic aesthetics, and it is through the calligraphy that the Chinese have learned their basic notions of line and form, end quote. Among the active experiments of the 1980s, there were a group of the young artists who received systematic and professional art education, focusing their attention on creating the pseudo characters with the calligraphic strokes and also compositional structures. Their main purpose was to define the essence of calligraphy as the line and the form, not the contents and information. Participants included Bai Qiansheng, Gu Wenda, Wu Sanzhuan, Gu Gan, and Zhu Qingsheng, and Xu Bing, and the Zhuang Tianming and the Qiu Zhenzong. Their pursuit was a very fundamental turning point and the starting point for modern calligraphy in mainland China, which urged modern calligraphy to explore and rethink about the nature of calligraphy as a form of art. Furthermore, it could encourage people to question and overthrow the established cultural connotation of calligraphy, which would result in a type of the modernist art involving the use of a calligraphic language. Many artists are trying to reform, revise, and recompose the traditional Chinese writing system in hope that they could push the boundary of meaning and the format. The writing system is a concentrated science of Chinese traditional culture and its endless plasticity in terms of formal structure and the meaning making. Such plasticity first came from its abstract structure that is also pictographic. The Chinese keep and develop the art of writing, calligraphy, not because of pictograph, but for its ideogram. Each character is a representative of the ideograph writing system, during its formation process, the characters were standardized with unchangeable basic structure. Consequently, its structure and the ideogram are two challenges for the contemporary artists who intended to bring the words and the writing into their work. From late 1980s and early 1990s, the most captivating the myth of the modern calligraphy has lost its attraction. Artists started to using the writing and the characters as the resource for their creativity, and paying the great attention to the artistic concept, artistic language, as well as the new materials and the mediums. The Dong Yangzi, the Taiwanese this artist, she actually developed kind of writing does not demonstrate does not deconstruct the characters, but emphasize the unity of words and the calligraphy, and try to reconstruct the cultural space between the calligraphy and the Chinese classical tradition. Guwenda introduced the pseudo characters into traditional ink painting, such as that in his pseudo character series, in which the ordinary characters was deconstructed, leaving the calligraphic stroke unchanged, but radicals and also components dissolved. By doing so, Guwenda makes pseudo and the upside down characters. The pseudo characters enjoy the great formal flexibility. Consequently, unusual combination of the characters further blocked the thinking process to decipher, and also generates the new meaning. One of the Xu early work, I think possibly many of you quite familiar with, the book From Heaven, challenged the ideographic nature of the characters. He deconstructed many originally meaningful characters and reconstructed with the new characters without meaning. In his installation work, it's a repetitive, meaningless labor results in the unreadable pseudo-Chinese characters displayed from the ceiling to the floor. It the questions and the satirize the function of the Chinese writing, which has been passing on culture and the cultural tradition for thousands of years. Instead of conveying and the real kind of semantic meanings, characters merely designated and became the the publication of the designator. Artists Guwenda and Xu emphasize the eligibility of the characters, which naturally took part of the nationwide cultural discourse. In the cultural media at the time, their practice has a strong connotation of the political propaganda, and thus it attracted attention and discourse, there's discussions beyond the art. Today, calligraphy related to work has become an important component in contemporary Chinese art. These works can be categorized into few groups. The first group can be traced back to the traditional calligraphy, but the artist trying to employ the modern concept and the methodologies. The second group, actually is to add the calligraphy elements into their visual form. These two groups basically explore. This is the second group we're talking about. These two groups actually basically explore the use and the representation of calligraphic language and the elements. The third group introduced the Chinese writing system or structure of the characters to conceptual art, including the new media art. On the feeling of the conventionalization in the traditional calligraphy, Qiu Zhenzong insisted on his theory of the transformative spatial concept, which means by the, I quote, by fragmenting the structure of the single character, which is also a spatial structure, and define the smallest grid as a unit, we reconstruct our spatial kind of experience in relation to the artwork, end quote. In his 4 series, the new poetry series, word series, signatures, and the character to be deciphered, Qiu Zhenzong tries to make the calligraphy a pure form of visual art and a behavioral manner, and neglect the conventionalization in terms of form and the contents. Wang Dongling, running script with experimental arrangement of the stroke and the composition, extended discourse on abstractness. In order to innovate the new calligraphic form that carry the modernist awareness, the artists consider the momentum and the rhythm of the line, the density and the dryness of the shade, as well as the principle of the composition as a part of the complete work. Doubtlessly, the American abstract expressionists and the character graphic art by the modern Japanese calligraphers such as the Teshima UK shown here, and Yuichi, shaded the light on Wang Dongling's own practice. You can see this Yuichi the work compared to Wang Dongling's work on the side, and and this kind of the impact will also be found in we also find it in the Yan Binghui's work. Yan Binghui, the artist, the teacher in the Tianjin Art Academy. You can see his works also influenced by Yuichi in many ways. And the Chen Guangwu tackled the traditional models in writing calligraphy. He extracts the basic strokes from the single complete character and reduce them to the basic strokes of the radicals, and freely change the shape. Every work of the Chen contains one single character and all radical in its duplications. He claims that his work is to decompose the readability of the character while writing. So the result presents the art of the strokes and his self-cultivation. Artists who incorporate the calligraphic language into their artwork, such as Zhang Dawo, who abandoned the legible and the meaningful Chinese characters, aligned in regular columns. But he cannot distance himself from the true sense of the excitement and even through the spontaneous writing. His work strictly avoided to retouch and reflect some characteristic in traditional running script, including the composition produced when the brush is moved rapidly and continuously across the paper. Zhang Dawo shows the distinctive sensitivity of emotions and mobility in brush strokes, and skillfully make the traditionalist brushwork and the modernist compositional ideas entangled. Thus, the works simultaneously satisfy the people's preference of the original pictorial composition that indicated the modernist awareness and evoked the people's nostalgia for tradition. Li Huashen's great paintings continues the phenomenological record of his life. He was inspired by the lines of the chanting monks when he visited a various Tibetan Buddhist monastery in 1990s. He was inspired by lines of the chanting monks. Like the chanting monks, the construction of the grid involved a deeply meditative process. Each line required patience and emptiness, repeated until the whole ground was filled. The vice of the Li Huashen was often able to point to a section of the particular grid and record the events occurring as he reached that part of the painting. We also have the Luo Qi as a painting here, used the symbols, icons, and the characters and the words. No matter they are classical, modern, Western, or Asian, or they are all convey his feeling to family, society, nature, and individuals. During the 1990s, conceptual art, including the new media art that used the writing or the structure of the Chinese characters, flooding into the contemporary art space. This signified that the modern calligraphy that joined the realm of the postmodernist art in terms of the both concept and practice. A group of artists that advocate the contemporary calligraphy is actually the non-calligraphy, anti-calligraphy, or decalligraphy. The Le Xinlong and the Wang Nanming held the Chinese contemporary calligraphy exhibition in Shanghai in 1991. In this exhibition, Wang Nanming brought up his idea of broke the lines with the traditional calligraphy in a radical way. He advocated that the contemporary calligraphy is actually non-calligraphy, anti-calligraphy, or decalligraphy. Combination, the both of the characters. In 1992, you can see here actually this reshowed later, reflect the artist's changing opinion. Wang first finished the work with a running script on a full-size rice paper, then scrunched the paper into balls and placed them in a construction site or and the unfinished building. The calligraphy lost its normal form and legibility, and the broken calligraphic lines became the abstract image on the spheres. This work criticized and neglects the traditional practice of calligraphy, leaves the audience in shock as the artist repeats this kind of meaningless label and provokes their thoughts on the sustainability of the traditional cultural science. At almost the same time, Zhang Qiang started to launch his performance installation project. Zhang Qiang's traceology report, this is the art project. It involved cooperating individually with the young woman of different race, identities, professionals, and nationalities. The woman would always decide on the type of the brush, size of the paper, and amount of the ink to be used. As she began to move the paper, Zhang Qiang would start writing sentences on the real characters. Each time, the interaction between the male and the female left a trace of the broken brushworks, which together with the documented archives from the site of the art making became the final work. His project deconstructs the writing of Chinese characters, questions calligraphic practice, and skillfully added the concepts of the feminism into the work. the artist intended to encourage viewers to think about the essence of calligraphy. The performance installation work by Wang and Zhang pushed the calligraphy into the realm of the conceptual art, which broadened the original sectional role of the calligraphy in community participation and the cultural construction. Such social construction in the field of the visual culture can be seen in other works. Zhou Ziji actually creates this work called Copying the Orchid Pavilion, Preference of the Southern Times, by copying the text repetitively, but always on the same sheet of the paper. As the layer of the words dissolved into the solid field of the black ink, a revered cultural icons was perpetuated and also obliterated. It is another type of the work of the time that tackles the cultural initial in China. Similar works, including the Song Dong, the water diary, shown on the screen. You can see here Song Dong write with the water on the piece of the stones. In his conceptual and the recent project, Digital Wars, Wang Tiande replaced the brush with a cigarette to write on paper or silk. In his work, each panel consisted of 2 sheets of paper layered one atop the other. The bottom sheet is inscribed with copies of classical masterpieces. The top sheets are made of the translucent paper into which the character have been burned with cigarettes or incense stick. The result turned to be like the rubbing from the ancient stone engravings. However, the artist's great skill in calligraphy is reflected in the calligraphic composition and the rhythms between the strokes, as well as sophisticated use of the brush. Xu Bing never actually separated words from the meanings, but he kept the pushing his own boundary and the challenge the ordinary midst of the viewers, midst for viewers. In his this reading landscape, the artist goes so far as translate the landscape into characters, turning the landscape painting into the hieroglyph. He employs the character of the mountain, stone, grass, the wood, water, earth, or birds into represent the whole landscape. He claims the Chinese literary artists were proud of synchronization of the poem, calligraphy, and painting. So I tried to make all these 3 things into one. You can argue that it is a piece of calligraphy or painting or text. Brush and ink can become a game. You can see this is his work actually further extended the 2D to 3D. Still use the same kind of concept. He used Chinese character to write all these kind of landscape elements into this 3D, the installation work. And that's the detail you can see here. Actually, the green parts, this is the Chinese character of the grass, and the white on the right side is water, and inside the orange is a fish, riding fish, and the brownish is a soil, and the white on the top as a stone, and also the leaves in green, and also the roads all in writing with the 3D the format here. And also you can see here all the shippings from tinsel to this the writing calligraphy. This is from the character without a meaning, now with the meaning as the painting, writing for his new work. In the exhibition, the ink dreams, the selection from the foundation ink collection recently shown in LACMA. I think possibly some of you have the chance to see the show. Actually, this showed show quite a few months at LACMA. The curator, the Susanna Farrell, introduced a group of the international artists working on these concepts. In Dai Guangwu's work, you can see here, the landscape, it's called the landscape. We see the thick opaque ink cut into the ice pond, reading mountains and waters, and all simply landscape. Indeed, this distant the mountains subtly framed into composition from above. Water too is represented by the slab ice, which simultaneously figures as the canvas. Reflection of the clouds evident particularly in the second panel of the diptych, added another dimension to the lyrical playfulness between the concrete and the figurative landscape. The tension between the first and the second panel, left and the right respectively, is telling how the nature, force, and the dimension of the time become active participants in the creative process. The Anthony Patch, this was born in the Budapest and immigrated with his family to Paris when he was 5. From the 1970 to his death, he lived and worked in Montreal. He was enormously creative as the painter and the printmaker, and was also known as a poet. The entitled of the work here, as shown on the screen, represents an imaginary aftermath, suggesting the cuneiform or the esoteric musical scores. In writing of the artist's text, there is a considerable variation in the symbols, size, and the force with which they were etched in the metal printing plates. Even the character's individual structure varied enormously. Somehow, the work combined the elegant format of the proclamation with the informality of the handwriting letters. The Singapore artist Charles A.K. might be one of the most successful ink painters. Reflection of the breeze passes by the lotus pond, shown on the screen, is a representative work in his well-known series of the lotus pond. Early works in the series showcase the 写意, or expressing the script style of the Chinese ink painting, exploring the spiritual essence through the loose brushwork and the aggressive forms. But the flowers and the leaves are still clearly discernible as such. Later, the lotus and they are reduced to the broken branches and also dry leaves of the late autumn. From there, the Chan actually developed the minimal style with the flattened composition, purely abstract form, and the expressive lines, as shown in this painting on the screen. As if so, the gibberish in the recorded in the illegible calligraphy, it is executed with the agitated and forceful brushwork, with the only essence of remaining. This painting actually conceptually illuminates the vitality of the lotuses. The Korean artist Kim Ho-do, in his San series, depicted not as single the range or mountain, but hundreds of mountains through the repetitive basic lines, linear form, squished the mountain's peak emerged from an immersed scene of fogs in seemingly empty space. Both formally and conceptually, the Sansan painting actually share the calm, emptiness, and the repetition found there. And even though the perceived initially a landscape, when the read as the abstract, it shares the minimalist quality of repeating a simple form. Forming chip is then the formal, the calligraphy, the reformal of calligraphy, morphing the millennium-old tradition into the practice of reflecting the contemporary life. His invented script, of which he says he has the over 100, including the sand script created by the blowing dry ink, powder ink sand over the characters written in the only water, swirl script characterized by the looping lines, and the post Mariana script, which varied in the aesthetic, but often including thick, overlapping brushworks. In his needle needle script, as seen here, forming to consider the spatial relationship of the both characters and the individual strokes, blurring the divide between the interior space of the characters. On the flight between New York and Asia, he scored the poem that inspired his work. Artist Yang Jiechang, now basically working in Paris and living both Germany and the Paris, in Heidelberg and Paris. Actually, was one of the pioneers in the 1980s Chinese avant-garde movement. In his the calligraphic works, you can see here, also turn these writings and also the strokes into conceptual art. Yang Lanbo is now the professor teach at the University of Macau. In his painting, synthesize the artistic tradition, East and West, and the traditional media and the digital technology. Through the digital art and the help of the digital technology, the 2D contemporary ink painting was transformed and become the multi-dimensional art in which the expressive power could be escalated and expanded. His recent work brings the contemporary ink painting, digitalization, interactive installation, and the theatricalization, video animation, and the multimedia performance from 2D to 4D together. This image might at the time remind the viewer of the elemental forces, seething magma, and the formation of the fossil, glaciation, or the solar flares. Or this, at the other time, they might be seen the metaphoric of the invisible dramas, cosmic or the spiritual crisis, powerful emotion, recollected the moments of the sincerity. This is also Lampo's work, you can see here. We are often see this kind of the uncertainty and the confusion in the use of calligraphic and the textual elements in the contemporary art, which actually leaves the potential and the space for later artists to explore. At the same time, another important thing worth noticing is that regardless of their different concepts, forms, and methods, artists all consciously or unconsciously associate individual culture identity with the social experience and incorporate them into the construction of the contemporary visual culture. This required us to put the artworks back into the cultural studies and the supplemental the traditional art history and the aesthetic studies with the personal experience and the observation of the social media. One key thing is to enhance and deepen our interpretation of the visual in its cultural process. This process completes our visual experience. On this issue, W.J.T. Mitchell provided a great reference in visual studies, which can be very useful and the potential benefits us. Perhaps we should not treat these arts involving writings as the mere visible or the readable subject or result. Rather, we are supposed to view this creative work as a process in which the social and the cultural identity is being constructed, or we may see it as a behavior or a happening and based on the incident itself. We can try to understand and search for its meaning. There are social constructions in the realm of the visual culture and the visual constructions in the realm of the social studies. Therefore, we should not only ask what do they mean or what are they for? Rather, it is more meaningful to ask, what do they want to do? What are the questions brought up by the works? What discourses are intended to evoke? What does it function as a cultural practice? Thank you very much. Hui Su, you should unmute.
Sorry. I thank you, Professor Sen, for such a rich topic, very illuminating. Let me just take an opportunity to speak to my class, and I know you're probably very busy taking all the notes, and you can also think about your question, and maybe you want to post your question directly on the Q&A. You can type in there. I think I have one already. Oh, okay. I start to receive some question. I wonder maybe can I ask the first couple questions?
Sure.
Okay. I think I asked you this before that I would love to look forward to have a updated exhibition on this subject, and I'm hoping that you will consider doing it, maybe with LACMA or whatever. I think it's just so rich there, and it also so engaging in the contemporary art and culture, but also it's so kind of inspiring, putting the angle of the dialogue with the whole Chinese tradition and identity. I have two more specific questions. One is you talk about 1985. This you view as a landmark exhibition in the National Museum in Beijing, right?
Yeah.
What's the title of it?
1985. Let me see.
Did they publish a catalog?
No, that time actually, in 1980s, most of the exhibition actually don't have catalog, even have the small pamphlet most of the time in the 80s, you will see they only have the list of the works, sometimes even didn't including the entire kind of the list of works. That's quite unfortunate.
Yeah,
and
so
also,
now it's involved,
many,
a methodological issue. I mean, I do have a couple of graduate students working on, modern contemporary era. So case like this, how you track it down?
It's this is the first get to know some artists to participate in this exhibition. They give information, and also the early kind of the report you find it in this kind of the newspapers, and also the magazines. This is the only kind of sometimes some show they have the selected works published in the art journals, and that time also have a couple of the art newspapers, so you can find the information from them.
Okay, thank you. It's very educational. And the my question, this is 85, right? And I'm from Taiwan. I work with some artists. I mean, they just really, write some occasional pieces. But I did kind of curate a show for my my friend Chu Ge in I think 90s. This is the catalog, and the with 4 authors, my own advisor, whatever, from Yale. There's one category, particularly, titled his 文字画. So I just take one more look at the catalog, starting from 80s, late 70s, 80s, and including he created this piece is on the cover of Michael Sullivan's 20th Century Chinese Artists. So on and so forth. My favorite is Song of Autumn. So I wonder you ever consider include him in this series, because it's considered in the late 70s, 80s, and I think this second wave modernist movement took place overseas, from Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Europe and America. For me, it's also meaningful, and also, of course, reflect my background. And and we're talking about modern contemporary art. I mean, of course, how they defined it, that you actually also include artists kind of in a global scale, or being reflected from the ink dream at the Lacama current show now. So that's one question about Chu Ge, where you place him. And also another modern dance group, the Cloud Gate, Yunmen. Since you also touch upon performance art, even the creator Lin Huaiming did not particularly call this is calligraphy art. Basically, it's just modern dance, but the different approach, and particularly the Cao Shu series. So anyway, I would like to hear from you.
Yeah, I think thank you for pointing out this. Actually, my talk is mainly concentrated on the art development made in China since the 1980s. But thank you to point out that in Taiwan, actually, these kind of the development the earlier in the 1970s already we see many artists that involved in this kind of experiment, like the Chu Ge you pointed out, and also also have a couple of the other artists that are doing that. This kind of since possibly people understand that time in 1970s, China is still in the Cultural Revolution period. These kind of the practice actually is impossible at the time. But after the Cultural Revolution ended in the beginning of the 1980s, when the China opened to the world, these kind of the modernist the art practice actually started. So I think certainly it's the Taiwanese artists, and also not only in Taiwan but in Hong Kong, they as a kind of the pioneer because they they stepped into this realm actually early than most of the mainland Chinese artists, because the historical this kind of the background. So of course I think will be very in future if they have a chance to have the kind of the opportunity to organize the exhibition. Certainly we should involve this, because I just mentioned here in the early 80s, when Chinese artists started to consider putting the calligraphy into painting, bring the painting into calligraphy, all this kind of idea we can see already appearing like the Chuge and other kind of pioneers, this artwork. So I think that this is definitely in the same kind of context. We should bring it together if we have a chance to make the narrative much more complete.
Great, thank you. And now we're going to the question. There are many, and the first one came from actually Professor Michael Berry's advisee, Du Lin, working on modern era. So she thinks your talk is not just really fascinating, and particularly the appreciate that the how you categorize the respective approaches of these artists. She was wondering if you could elaborate more on their ties to the traditions of copying calligraphic models, as well as their connection to design tradition in modern China.
Could you repeat the last two sentences?
Oh, she asked whether you can elaborate more on their ties, of these artists, different the way you address or try to categorize different approaches, and their tie to the tradition of copying calligraphic model, as well as their connections to design tradition in modern China.
Yeah, certainly there's many artists we listed here, especially in the 1980s when they started this kind of experiment of the modern calligraphy. These artists, we quite often we will see they are originally the calligraphers themselves. So like, we mentioned many names here, like this kind of Wang Dongling, Bai Qianshen, and also the Qiu Zhenzong. These artists actually, they are very good calligraphy. They are familiar with all this kind of the traditional kind of script writing, and also as the training as calligraphy, possibly the copying, and also this kind of the early kind of the masterpieces that also have a very good skill on writing skill in terms of calligraphy, traditional calligraphy or conventional kind of writing skill. So in their this work, you can see even like Wang Dongling was one of the typical kind of the example. His even the so-called modern calligraphy never actually completely leave the tradition, and even the recent so-called he called it the Ruanshu and this kind of the writing can still completely based on the original. The Chaoshu or the grass, the cursive writing, and although to bring this kind of new kind of performance type, the concept of performance, and also the Japanese kind of the writing this kind of concept into his work. I think that also including American kind of abstract expressionist work into his work. So, but the connection to the Chinese traditional and the calligraphy is very obvious. Of course, to have the other artists, they come from different directions. Their works are not necessarily considered in the early kind of the writing and script too much in their work, especially the conceptual artists. Many also from different media. And they are mainly is bringing the Chinese character as the base, the structural character, components of a character, these kind of as the base. Some are the considered actually the meaning that Xiping actually they consider mainly as the meaning and the character, the words, this kind of the relationship, and also the challenge of people's the kind of this kind of the conception. For these kind of the when they encounter these kind of the writings, no matter in what kind of the form, but in the form of the Chinese character, what kind of the kind of conception of these kind of the people first on when they encounter this kind of the writing first appeared in their mind. So this is I think Xiping's work. But it should be quite interesting. The example I should say. I remember when Xiping just when he created this Tianshu and the Book from Heaven, Actually, he didn't really need to write because the structure and the strokes are based on the Song dynasty, these kind of the printing, the form. But later, actually, when he started to trying to create the new English calligraphy, actually he has to write these kind of characters in the Chinese. So his writing actually, there's calligraphy, the writing, at least these words as not Chinese words, but his writing, the stroke, moving the brushwork, as it kind of this, according to the traditional Chinese, the characters, components, and the strokes becomes much better. Actually, his calligraphy, Chinese calligraphy, really greatly improved during the process when he created this kind of conceptual art. That's kind of, it's very interesting. You can see, of course, he is Chinese. He have this understanding and these kind of characters or the things, but you can see the practice is still. We know if you interested in writing Chinese calligraphy, the practice of the every day is very, very important. I think when Shipping makes the kind of conceptual work for the English calligraphy, English character for English calligraphy, he getting really kind of become very skillful calligrapher now.
Well, thank you, Kui, for your insight and also, your encyclopedic knowledge, and so generous to share. We have quite a number of questions. But for Dulin's question, since she asked about design tradition, I would like to, if I may, I would like to fill in a little bit because I'm the one actually quite interested in. I have some colleagues working on it. In China, the tradition, at least you can go back to Qin and Han, the first dynasties. Think of the Chinese Wadang, whatever, those are character design, right? And the Warring States, a lot of this inlay, the bronzes, so fantastic design. You can say it's a decor pattern, but a lot of actually based on the writing. So and go on and on to Shanghai era. Actually, Professor Shen had published something, work on it, the design and work, the applied art in Shanghai, and since early 20th century. But that's another huge topic. We cannot get there. Before I bring out the other questions, and this one from Professor Rob Birnbaum from UC Santa Cruz. And again, could you keep in mind, there are many more questions coming. Okay, so you cannot be too generous. Could you reflect on some of the contextual differences, economic, audience, status of the artist, etc., between calligraphic art up to, say, the 1930s compared to the 1980s and beyond? That's a huge topic.
Yeah, this is a big question. It's compared to 1930s and the 1980s. I think the possibly the major difference is because the 50 years apart is historical context is quite different. And when the 30s, actually that time, this kind of the modern calligraphy haven't started yet, and also the artists, the people practice calligraphy itself. It's the reason. I think the major difference is the 1930s and 80s. In the 1930s, the calligraphy itself is still one of the important tools for the people, especially as educated intellectuals. You have the good writing in calligraphy. That's still very important. Even that time, printing industry already became very well developed, but in the personal ordinary life, so the writing calligraphy is still important when you especially the correspondence between the people. Still, most of them are handwriting letters. So the calligraphy itself actually is represents the people's education level. But in the 1980s, this changed dramatically. The first, the kind of the correspondence between the people, actually 1980s, although in the writing still very important, but also replaced by many other means. So the calligraphy also not necessarily represent the people's kind of educational level. Many, honestly, in the 1980s, we'll find many very good writers. Their calligraphy, not calligraphy, their handwriting was terrible. but that didn't matter. We cannot say that people handwriting is not good. They are necessary means they are not well educated. So this didn't really reflect the status at the time, status of the people in the society. So this I think that's why in the 1980s there's a turn of the calligraphy, the turn this kind of the study of calligraphy in a different kind of direction, especially turn into the art, push the calligraphy into the art realm, and because there's a practical function of the calligraphy dramatically reduced, and this artistic side of the calligraphy and become the kind of the tradition you can continue with a different way. And also the new kind of the idea about especially bring the conceptual art, bring the other medias into the calligraphy. You can see the calligraphy open to the calligraphers and a much wider kind of range. They can explore this kind of calligraphy in different way. So I don't know if I answered the professor the Bourbon's the question or not. This some kind of the thought, my 2 cents. Yeah.
All right. The next question is from Diego Pendo. Is there any discussion of contemporary Chinese street art, like graffiti, and its connection to the calligraphic tradition? Yeah, I thought of Zhang Dali.
Yeah, the street art we do see actually in the contemporary art, but compared to United States, this kind of graffiti is much less we see in China. Possibly in the urban the area this kind of quite restrict the stricter kind of the rules and the regulations for the people actually can write in the public space, and this is for the many reasons. It's one so this graffiti type this art, street art, much less, but just like the Professor Lee just mentioned, the one artist Zhang Dali. Actually, this is the artist in the certain kind of the moment when this construction, the large scale construction appeared in China in the major cities. We see this give the artist have the kind of street artists some kind of space there, because they start to create a certain kind of graffiti art in this kind of the buildings supposed to be move away or destroyed. So on these kind of ruins of the buildings and the architectures, artists didn't have the chance at the space to develop their graffiti type the art. But this just very limited, because only this kind of space possibly no one care. But in the normal buildings and the normal street and the public space, usually there's quite a little space for the Chinese artists to develop kind of street art.
Okay, thank you. I'm typing this for Diego. Okay, I sent you the Chinese character. Okay, the next question is a challenging one. Could Professor Shen perhaps comment on the male-dominated form of art? I couldn't help but notice that almost all of the artists' features are men. Would male artists have certain types of access to resources which enable them to produce this type of art?
Yeah, this is a tough question, actually, and that's related to the many kind of the issues and actually involved in China. It's true. We didn't see too many kind of the female artists actually appeared, especially in the 1980s and the early 90s. This period give you a kind of the reality, kind of the happening in China, especially in the art world. In the art academy, I give you the two academies. In Beijing, the Central Academy of Fine Arts, and also in the Hangzhou, now the China Academy of Art, and at that time the Zhejiang Academy of Fine Arts. the female students, if it was in ratio of the male and female students during the 80s and early 90s in these schools, that of course the schools actually the student population greatly increased later in the second half of the 90s and also in 2000s. But at that time in the 80s and early first half of the 90s, these still very limited the kind of student accepted by these elite kind of academies. The female students is about like the oil painting department. If they accept 15 students or 10 students for each class, it's a very small number at that time. Possibly only 1 or 2 the female students they were accepted. This is the reality at the time. Quite unfortunately, we should say. Now you will see that in the art academies, in the art institutions in China, possibly female students, the number of female students more than the male students now. This is also quite often we see in the United States too. But this is the situation quite different in the 1980s and the 1990s, we say. And here I listed most of the artists, and they are the generation of the most of them graduate from the 80s and the early 90s. Mm-hmm. That's why this we'll say these kind of well-established artists in this field, they are mostly males. Very, very few females. That's quite unfortunate, but also on one hand, we are quite happy to see the situation actually changing now.
Thank you. The next question from Li Shuangyi. Again, such a rich, informative talk. Thank you so much. Has the content of this presentation already been published somewhere? Or I can't wait to read more about the subject. Have you published any?
Not yet.
So, we are very privileged to hear this, such an early stage. There's another question from Zhang Yanshuo. Thank you again. It seems that most of the artists you presented make deliberate connection to traditional Chinese art, such as Sanshui Hua, landscape painting. What are some other artistic motifs or inspirations for these artists other than Sanshui Hua? For example, do they seek to connect with Western or other artistic tradition other than traditional Chinese or East Asian art?
It's a good question. This, of course, you can see some artists that certainly that received kind of the impact, the influence from the Western modernism. This is no doubt, and also especially like the abstract expressionist artists' work, and certainly is another very important source for them. But calligraphy itself, because its nature and also its strong connection to the Chinese culture, and for the artists to practice the calligraphy are linked to their art in no matter which way to the calligraphy, of course, have the strong connection to the traditional Chinese own culture, and also possibly to the painting, just like you mentioned, the landscape painting or Chinese Sanshui painting, because no matter the brushwork we say, still, if the artist accepted some conceptual artists, also artists use the other media to practice the art. Most of the artists, no matter use the calligraphic language or they bring the media in their work, still use the same kind of tools and associated with the Chinese ink painting. So that's why in the early 80s and in the 80s and early 90s, still very much kind of the discussion is about the relation between the calligraphy and the painting. As here, the painting actually is mainly related to the traditional Chinese ink painting. Mm-hmm. So this connection, I think, is very obvious, and also I think the most important kind of connection.
There's one more question from Yves Leonard. How do the different styles and representations of calligraphic work influence the way in which they are perceived by the audience? Are some styles better perceived or more popular?
This is the possibility back to the real calligraphy. I think the questions are related to the. Of course, the Chinese calligraphic writing we see this from the quite long time ago. Actually, basically the basic kind of the writing style or the script that people used for writing already that became kind of standardized. Start from quite an early time. We see actually after Chinese Tang Dynasty, basic kind of the script practiced by people already kind of became the standardized, became convention. So such as the most of the people familiar with in the daily life writing is the regular script writing and also the cursive script writing. And but if you have to understand the like a grass kind of script writing or the grass cursive writing, you need a certain kind of knowledge of this early kind of the Chinese classical Chinese. Otherwise, very difficult because the like a grass script writing is developed based on the components of the early Chinese classical characters in some way. And although some possibly can later when the simplified Chinese used a certain kind of the form in a certain way, actually based on this grass cursive writing. But also some kind of script writing, like the seal script writing, actually that start from early time already used the term, and the 篆书 or seal script writing, it means this kind of writing, although appeared in the early time in the Chinese Zhou dynasty and even back to even early, but in the Zhou and the later the dynasty, this already used kind of this kind of writing, script writing, specifically for the early, the inscription on the bronze or the certain kind of stonework. So the later people only use kind of writing for seal carving. That's why we now call it the seal script writing. And also for clerk script writing, it's developed in the Chinese Han Dynasty and this later the 6th Dynasty period, the Han and the Wei period. So this kind of writing is later also respected as the specific kind of writing style developed in the certain the time period in the ancient China. But later, this kind of the knowledge of this kind of script writing became the standard to make the judgment to the people, especially the educated people. You do have this kind of knowledge of early Chinese culture and the Chinese this kind of the calligraphy actually linked to their the educational level. So although in practically this kind of writing is not often you can see in the people's daily life. So the people the copying and learn this kind of script writing, I think the mainly is for this kind of for the knowledge of the early culture, and also for special kind of the training and practice of how to use a brush.
All right, I think we're running out of time, but I think I got most of the question, and the Professor Sun already has been speaking for over 1 hour 15 minutes, 1 hour 20 minutes. So I think I would like to, thanks Professor Sun again, and to conclude today's event. So Michael, do you have any?
I'll just thank you, Professor Lee, and thank Professor Shen for sharing your ongoing research with us. And of course, to our audience, we are so happy everyone could join us today for this event. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.